There's a lot of ambient sound where I am. I live in an urban center. So there's a lot of machine noise. And the sonic environment is filled with boxes and channels. It's highly articulated, so that it can be difficult to tell where a sound is coming from, even to one who is orally attentive and intelligent and focused, because often one's first encounter with a sound has been reflected and changed by many angular structures, unlike anything that ever existed in nature for most of the history of life on Earth. And I'd like to meander around a rather dangerous hypertopic. And for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to call it red and blue. And we can imagine that for plants and animals, especially for insects, color carries information. Not just information of the kind that we think of, but a kind we would have a hard time imagining if it weren't for the sounds of human voices living information. Right? So that my voice doesn't just carry the words, it doesn't completely or explicitly carry my ideas, or my senses or hopes, or the completed thought and understanding images of what I attempt to paint with them, but the very music of it carries something of my soul, the spirit of my origins and intelligence, myself as an expression of nature, humanity, the history of life on Earth, time, space, the sun, everything, really. So in my voice there's dimensions of living information that are probably infinite. We could perhaps discriminate and analyze some of them. But it would be impossible to, quote, analyze all of them, because a living mind, or an organism of any kind, isn't fundamentally analytical. It's in a superposition over all possible analyses. Yeah? And so no matter what we might analyze, we'd be missing most of what's there for a living creature. In the same way that a machine would miss the feelings that would happen if I suddenly started raising my voice to yell, or if I raised the pitch of my voice in the cute way that we do when we talk to children. Right? A machine might be able to technically understand the implications of such a move, but no machine would feel the feelings that we get when we receive living information. Even if it's been artifacted and compressed and transmitted and reflected off of many angular structures in machines, or, as with sound, in buildings and cities. So for most of nature, all those creatures with eyes, and even those without them because they all have skin, right? And for all those creatures of nature, light and color are a living language. And in the same way you can smell a scent and recognize it, yeah, they can see and sense aspects of light and sound as flow that are living information, not merely analytical data, right? Not merely tactical data, all kinds of impossibly amazing modes and domains of data. So that most organisms on Earth live in an unimaginable flowing stream of novelty, endless novelty. Those humans who know what it means to have had madness or psychedelic experience, or a very unusual dreaming experience, or perhaps a moment of authentic, ecstatic escape from the shell we live in, will know something about what I mean by that novelty. The madness, of course, is the shadow, it's dark shadow of our relationship with novelty. And the psychedelia is a kind of almost a cartoon version of novelty, much less terrifying than the real thing. So for most of nature, except the people like us who have representational minds that are prone to apply deceptive completeness to concepts and identity, color and light and waves are an endless, foaming, turbulent sea of living information. And in this sea there are two fascinating polarities that are easily identifiable, even to us with eyes: red and blue. Now, red and blue are not ordinary colors because we know about light and sound waves, a peculiar feature that in sound, in English we call the Doppler shift. And I don't know precisely what it's called. Oh yes, in light it's called we might call it red shift or blue shift. Yeah? So that we understand that the frequency of wave-like phenomenon has this peculiar quality where an approaching source, to put a three-part symmetry very simply, there are three parts to this symmetry. I'm just going to talk about the most, the simplest one, right? An approaching source will shift, its light will shift toward blue as the frequency increases, and a departing source, the light will shift toward red. You can hear that happening maybe in the engines that you might hear in the background. As the frequency of the departing source lengthens. I hope it's not the wavelength. I may have it backwards, but it's okay. I'm not a physicist. So we can just notice that the color blue kind of tells us that some sort of a source is approaching. And the color red tells us that something is departing. And the analogous feature in sound waves is the increase in frequency and decrease in frequency or pitch. And again, I'm not a physicist, but essentially an increasing pitch indicates approach, and a decreasing pitch indicates departure. And so in sound, an increasing pitch is blue, and a decreasing pitch is red. Now, you may have heard a bird in the background. It goes something like doo-dee, doodly, 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 doodly. Yeah? And what it's doing there is literally going red, blue, red, blue, red, blue, red, 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 right? in a very peculiar way, where it's telling the universe something about its own personal, so to speak, not that the bird has a person, its own organismal presence in red-blueness. Yeah? And it's advertising that with intelligent music. And humans may think this has one function or something like this. It no more has one function than what I'm doing now. In fact, compared to what I'm doing now, it has a lot more functions. Humans are very deceived because we have sort of monodimensional methods of signaling and communication, whereas nature would never waste time in a single dimension. She's always going to signal in 50. And of course, when we do that authentically, we can't help doing that. As long as we're speaking instead of typing, there's a bunch of dimensions there that are infinitely rich. Once we're typing, however, all of those are missing and have to be somehow supplied by the poor recipient. Yeah? And of course, it's gotten to the point where even when we're speaking, this doesn't work because we're so focused narrowly on things like the words, possible interpretations, possible critiques, possible objections, possible inversions, right? So we're kind of stuck. But isn't it fascinating, this feature of redness and blueness? We can see it all around us in everything we do. We can see it in our feelings as we approach and depart from one another, or even from situations. Yeah? There's a blue increase in frequency, yeah, and then we enter the thing, we feel that, we may feel frightened, nervous, etc. Yeah, which I'm having right now, right? And then we're in the thing, and then as it departs the frequency, or the wavelength, whatever is correct, shall we say the pitch, slows down, and we take a deep breath. And our breathing might even increase during approach. Yes? Our pulse rate might increase. In our two-chambered heart, and which has something analogous to approaching and departing, right? Approaching needing oxygen, departing, and also with other peculiar qualities, and departing oxygenated. Each word that we use has something like this. And the siren is one of the strangest phenomenon, because a siren is a phenomenon that in sound is going red, blue, red, blue, red, blue. So it's saying I'm approaching, departing, approaching, departing, approaching, departing. That's a very, very strange thing to be signaling about. Nothing in nature signals like that. But then, because the siren is also happening in sound, and its source is often moving, it's triply peculiar, because now it's going red, blue in sound, and it just so happens that we've chosen red and blue lights to put on top of them as well. That's not an accident, by the way. So it's saying approaching, departing, approaching, departing, approaching, departing in light and in sound. And then we can't detect it in light, but in sound it's Doppler shifting. And dogs can detect this. Probably all animals detect it, but for dogs, it is both terribly confusing and painful, unless they are deaf. And part of that confusion and pain is the combination of the Doppler shift effect and the sonic effect of the siren. So isn't it strange that we would make a vehicle, and that vehicle would be the most urgent vehicle, the vehicle that interrupts everything, no matter what's going on, no matter who it's going on for. And on this vehicle we would put red, blue, and we would give it a sound that says approaching, departing, approaching, departing, approaching, departing. And we would name this after after a story figure, after a mythical figure in a story, whose song draws brave souls to their doom with illusory promises, sort of mad seductions and such. At least in the story, I believe, of Odysseus. Yeah, the siren is known for this quality, right? To be both irresistibly compelling and ironically deceptive. And it's very strange in our culture today that we can sort of see lots of evidence of this, right? Where the agents who operate and the systems that those agents express, that operate the cars with the red and blue lights that make the sirens, in many of the domains, but particularly in those where they're tasked to protect us, something strange has happened, and they're attacking us. Yeah? And so the sound of the siren that once always meant, for nearly everyone, the arrival of aid and intelligence and intervention from above, hopefully in a very good and peaceful, intelligent and human way, has come to mean nearly explicitly the opposite. And then when we all hear this sound, which those of us who live in cities hear regularly, we know this. Right? We know what the sound, what that red, blue represents. Now, it's also fascinating that we have a sort of, there's been some public dialogue about boys and girls and colors. And we've always sort of, associated blue with boys and pink with girls. And it's kind of funny because boys tend to be very penetrative, right? And they also tend to kind of up the ante, so to speak, in general, in all cultures. I mean, you can look around and find some exceptions, and you can find exceptional boys, feminine boys, masculine boys. But whether we suppose that masculinity and femininity have any specific behavioral qualities or something like that, we can just notice kind of something basic, that the boy is approaching and the girl is receiving, or at least during the reproductive act. And the boy, makes kind of fast pulses, right? Something like an approaching star does. Faster pulses. A star approaching Earth from far away will shift into the blue. And the girl makes receptive pulses, and much like a star receding into the distance. The man, when upset, may yell. Of course, this is cultural, and the girl is perhaps more likely to whisper. And the man may raise his, how should we put it, his volume, and tends to use tone relatively narrowly, whereas the girl will use her music. And again, this is enculturated too, right? Yet we can see that also the girl bleeds and the man doesn't. The girl makes redness. So those features altogether really fairly clearly associate the soothing departure of tension, right, with the woman. And men go to women for the soothing departure of tension. Right? So you can kind of see that blue and red go a lot deeper than it looks on the surface, and that even in the songs of the music of my voice right now, I'm making a complex pattern of approaches and departures, yeah? And also of, how shall we put it, bridges of gaps between them. And not just in one domain, but in many at once, right? Not just in the domain of having said things. If we're at all, if I'm at all succeeding, your mind is following itself to new ways of seeing and thinking about the nature of waves and signals in reality, rather than in, how we conceive of things. We have all these metrics, yards and feet, seconds and hours, things like this. But in reality, there are two metrics of unity. Around here, the speed of sound, right, is what represents one in terms of speed down here in this medium. And in electromagnetic waves and longer distances, the speed of light represents one. So all other speeds should be portions of those, right? Those are the fundamental metrics. In many cases, we've replaced those fundamental metrics with things like feet and miles and yards and seconds, hours, days, months, calendars, etc. But nature tells us what unity means, what one is. Yeah? And that should have priority over all of our systems. And when it does, we would easily see that addition is blue and subtraction is red. I mean, multiplication is blue and division is red. But there are situations in which those properties may change and become more complex. Yeah. We wouldn't say boys are blue and girls are red, right? We would notice that masculinity perhaps has peculiar, obvious aspects of constant approaching with tension, and also a kind of a red inside, yeah, that draws the man to discover the red inside himself in the feminine, in space, in the gaps between things, in silence, in origin, where the waves settle down. And the woman, not the woman, but the woman in our figure here, we're just making a figure, we're not talking about men and women. The woman in our figure, she likes excitement. She wants adventure. She would like a really fun way to make those waves come faster and such, so that she gets to sense what she's like, what the blue core of her being is like and is as herself. So truly the red within the blue and the blue within the red, and all the myriad ways that they can become people, not just as a person, but as a moment of a person, as a moment of personation in a situation. Yeah? So we can see no one's explicitly blue. No one's explicitly red. It's impossible, right? In fact, most of reality is the conversation between them. Yeah? In billions of dimensions, we've never even been, we've been a bit too timid to approach, especially in language, and for the purposes we ordinarily pursue such questions. There's a gentle mist now in the air, and it's filled with green signals in light to my eyes, and the songs of many birds. They're buried in the noise of machines, also in dimensions we cannot see, and they're being reflected back to me by the edges of buildings. But even after having been thus processed, artifacted, contended with, inhibited, buried, counterfeited, and represented when a living ear is in that field. There's an incredible intelligence of conversation there. And it's amazing that understanding color and unity, color, waves in sound, waves in light, is fundamental to the possibilities of our physics, language, relationships, mathematics, music, meaning, heartbeats, bodies, cells. This is a unimaginably universal pivot, and I'm grateful to have been able to orbit it a bit creatively with you today. So thank you. I guess the signal here goes toward red.